Andrew Carlson. A man walked into a Toronto FBI field office and voluntarily surrendered himself. He carried no weapon. He hadn't committed a violent crime. What he had done was turn a modest $800 investment into $350 million in just 2 weeks through 126 consecutive high-risk stock trades. Every single one had been perfectly timed. Every single one had been profitable. Statistical analysis would later show that the odds of achieving this by chance were approximately 1 in 3 trillion. The FBI had been tracking Carlson for days. His trading pattern was impossible. He had shorted stocks hours before unexpected corporate scandals broke. He had bought into companies minutes before surprise merger announcements. He had sold positions the day before market crashes that no analyst had predicted. It wasn't insider trading. It was something far more disturbing. During his initial interrogation, Carlson remained calm. He explained that he wasn't from 2003. He claimed to have traveled back from the year 2256, where the stock market fluctuations of the early 21st century were well-documented historical events. He had simply memorized the key movements before making the journey back. Federal agents dismissed this as an obvious fabrication designed to avoid insider trading charges. But when they pressed him for the sources of his information, Carlson couldn't provide names. When they demanded documentation, he had none. When they threatened him with decades in prison unless he revealed his network of informants, he calmly repeated that he had no informants because he was from the future. The interrogation took an unexpected turn when Carlson offered to prove his claims. He provided specific predictions about future events. He stated that the United States would not find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq despite the ongoing invasion. He predicted the exact date that Saddam Hussein would be captured. He described the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami with disturbing precision, including the approximate death toll and the countries that would be most severely affected. Agents recorded these predictions but remained skeptical. Then Carlson began discussing technology that didn't exist in 2003. He described handheld devices that would replace computers, cameras, music players, and phones in a single piece of glass and metal. He explained social media platforms where billions of people would share their daily lives with strangers. He detailed electric vehicles that would outsell traditional cars within 2 decades. What made federal investigators pause was the technical accuracy of his descriptions. He didn't speak in vague generalities. He provided specific details about touchscreen technology, battery capacity improvements, and wireless data transmission speeds that engineers confirmed were theoretically possible but not yet achievable with current technology. The case took an even stranger turn when Carlson's attorney negotiated his release in exchange for disclosing the location of Osama bin Laden. According to the official record, Carlson posted bail and simply vanished. He never appeared for his trial. No trace of him was ever found, despite intensive federal manhunts across North America. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. Every prediction Carlson made during his interrogation came true. Hussein was captured on the exact date he specified. The tsunami occurred precisely as he described. The technological developments he detailed have all materialized within the time frames he indicated. Financial investigators discovered something else. The bank accounts where Carlson had deposited his trading profits were systematically emptied in the days following his disappearance. The money was transferred through a complex series of international transactions that ended at institutions that didn't exist. The account numbers he used weren't formatted according to any modern banking system. The routing codes didn't match any known financial network. Wall Street analysts who studied Carlson's trading records found something deeply unsettling. His trades weren't based on technical analysis or fundamental research. They showed no pattern that conventional trading algorithms could recognize. It was as if he had simply known the future and acted on that knowledge with complete confidence. The SEC investigation was quietly closed in 2005. The official explanation stated that Carlson had likely used sophisticated insider trading networks and fled the country before prosecution. But investigators who worked the case have different stories. They describe a man who spoke about future events with absolute certainty. A man who seemed genuinely confused by technology that was commonplace in 2003. A man who vanished without leaving any conventional trace. Financial databases show no record of anyone named Andrew Carlson existing before 2002 or after 2003. His Social Security number was valid, but belonged to a deceased infant from the 1800s. His driver's license was authentic, but issued by a DMV office that had closed years before it was supposedly printed. Every aspect of his documentation was simultaneously legitimate and impossible. The Liverpool experiment. In 1932, a group of scientists at the University of Liverpool conducted what they described as breakthrough research into temporal mechanics. The project was led by Dr. Robert Nelson, a physicist whose earlier work on electromagnetic field theory had earned him international recognition. What happened during that research would be systematically erased from academic records and never officially acknowledged by any institution. The experiment involved subjecting test subjects to carefully calibrated electromagnetic pulses while monitoring their neurological responses. The official goal was to study how the human brain processed time perception. But witness accounts suggest something far more profound occurred in that laboratory. On the evening of November 8, 1932, laboratory assistant Margaret Foster was preparing equipment for the next day's experiments. She activated the electromagnetic field generators to run a standard calibration test. The machinery hummed to life, creating the familiar pulse pattern that had become routine over months of research. What happened next was documented in Foster's personal diary, which remained hidden in her family's possession until 2018. According to her account, the laboratory suddenly filled with people who hadn't been there moments before. Men and women in clothing that looked wrong. Fabrics that seemed too perfect. Shoes with no visible seams. Haircuts that didn't match any style of the 1930s. These individuals appeared confused and disoriented. They looked around the laboratory with expressions of recognition mixed with bewilderment. Several of them approached Foster, speaking in English but using words and phrases she didn't understand. They asked about the date. They wanted to know if the experiment had worked. They referred to Dr. Nelson by name and seemed to expect him to be present. Foster described one woman in particular who identified herself as Dr. Sarah Chen. She claimed to be a temporal physicist from the year 2089 and explained that the electromagnetic pulse Foster had activated had created an unintended resonance with a future experiment. The two temporal fields had briefly connected, pulling Chen and her colleagues backward through time. Chen provided Foster with specific technical details about the equipment in the laboratory. She described modifications that would stabilize the temporal field and prevent dangerous feedback loops. She sketched diagrams showing improvements to the electromagnetic coils that would increase efficiency by orders of magnitude. The technical knowledge she displayed was far beyond what should have been possible in 1932. The incident lasted approximately 7 minutes. Then the field destabilized. The visitors from the future began to fade, becoming transparent before vanishing entirely. Foster was left alone in the laboratory with nothing but her memories and the technical diagrams Chen had hastily drawn. When Dr. Nelson returned the next morning, Foster showed him the diagrams and described what had occurred. Nelson's response was immediate and severe. He confiscated Foster's notes, forbade her from discussing the incident, and ordered her to destroy any records of the previous night's events. The electromagnetic equipment was dismantled that same day. Foster kept copies of Chen's technical diagrams hidden in her personal effects. After her death in 1987, her daughter found these documents and recognized their significance. Engineering analysis confirmed that the designs showed understanding of electromagnetic principles that weren't discovered until decades after they were drawn. University of Liverpool archives contain no official record of Nelson's temporal research. The laboratory where the experiments occurred was demolished in 1934. Nelson himself transferred to a different university in 1933 and never published another paper on electromagnetic field theory. He died in 1956 without ever publicly discussing his Liverpool research. But Foster's diary entries are specific and consistent. She described details about the visitors' appearance, their technology, and their reactions that suggest genuine experience rather than fabrication. Most compelling are the technical diagrams that show knowledge of physics that didn't exist in 1932. The Toward Passport. A well-dressed businessman arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport on a routine flight from Europe. He carried a valid passport, spoke multiple languages fluently, and behaved exactly like thousands of other international travelers passing through Japan that day. Customs officials would have processed him without incident if not for one impossible detail. His passport was issued by a country that didn't exist. The document appeared authentic in every way. High-quality paper, proper security features, official government stamps and seals. The passport identified the man as a citizen of Taurog, a European nation that customs officials had never heard of. When they questioned him about this obvious forgery, the man became genuinely confused. He pulled out a map and pointed to the location of his homeland. His finger indicated a region between France and Spain where the Principality of Andorra existed. But on his map, Andorra wasn't labeled. Instead, the word Taured was printed across that territory in clear, official-looking text. The man wasn't behaving like someone caught with fraudulent documents. He was behaving like someone confronting an impossible situation. He insisted that Taured had existed for nearly 1,000 years. He showed them his driver's license, also issued by Taured. He presented business cards from his employer, a company based in Taured's capital city. He had currency from Taured in his wallet, coins and bills, that showed different European monarchs and bore denominations that didn't match any known monetary system. Immigration officials detained him for further questioning. The man remained calm, but increasingly bewildered. He explained that he traveled to Japan regularly for business and had made this exact trip several times before. He couldn't understand why customs was suddenly questioning his documentation. He asked to contact the Taured embassy in Tokyo, becoming agitated when officials told him no such embassy existed. Investigators verified his story about previous trips to Japan. Hotel records showed he had stayed at the same Tokyo hotel multiple times over the past several years. The hotel staff recognized his photograph and confirmed he was a regular guest. Company records showed business meetings and transactions that matched his travel schedule. Everything about his story was verifiable, except for one detail. The country he claimed to represent didn't exist. The man's business associates in Tokyo were contacted. They confirmed knowing him and conducting business with his company. But when asked about Taured, they seemed confused. Some remembered conducting business with a company from Andorra. Others recalled the company being based in France. Their memories were inconsistent, as if reality itself was uncertain about which country employed this mysterious traveler. Authorities placed the man in a hotel room under guard while they investigated further. His passport was sent for detailed forensic analysis. His other documents were photographed and examined. Officials planned to continue questioning him the following morning and arranged for interpreters and legal representatives to be present. When guards checked on him the next morning, the room was empty. The door had been locked from the inside. The window was sealed and unopened. The man had vanished without leaving any trace. More disturbing was what investigators discovered when they retrieved his documents from the evidence room. The passport from Taured was gone. His driver's license had disappeared. Even the currency from his wallet had vanished from the sealed evidence bags. The only remaining proof of the incident were the initial reports filed by customs officials and the testimony of the hotel staff who had interacted with the mysterious traveler over the years. But even those records became problematic. When investigators reviewed the security footage from the airport, the businessman appeared on camera, but the close-up shots of his passport showed the document blurred and unreadable, as if the camera couldn't quite focus on it. The case was quietly filed away, with no official explanation. But customs officials who were present that day maintained their testimony. They describe a man from a country that existed in his reality, but not in ours. A traveler who had somehow crossed between parallel timelines where geography and history had taken slightly different paths. The Cinema Ghost. On October 21, 1917, the reopening of the Charlie Chaplin film, The Kid, was being celebrated at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Studio cameras captured the event for publicity purposes, filming the crowd as they arrived for the premiere. The footage was stored in studio archives and remained unremarkable for over 90 years. Then in 2010, filmmaker George Clark examined the footage using modern digital enhancement technology and discovered something that defied explanation. Walking through the crowd was a woman in dark period-appropriate clothing. Nothing about her appearance was particularly unusual for 1917. but she was holding a small black rectangular object pressed against her ear. Her posture, her hand position, and her obvious state of engaged conversation made it unmistakable. She was using a mobile phone. Clark slowed down the footage and enhanced it frame by frame. The woman's mouth was clearly moving. She was speaking to someone. Her facial expressions showed the natural rhythm of conversation, responding to what she was hearing, pausing to listen, then speaking again. Her walking pattern showed the distracted, purposeful movement of someone navigating a crowd while focused on a phone call. The object she held matched the size and shape of a modern smartphone. She held it at the precise angle someone would use to speak into a phone's microphone while listening through its speaker. Her thumb appeared to rest on what would be the screen area, exactly how someone would hold a modern device. Film restoration experts examined the original celluloid. The footage was authentic, unedited, and contained no evidence of tampering or manipulation. The woman was present at that premiere in 1917, using that device, and the camera had captured it all on film that wouldn't be digitized for nearly a century. Additional analysis revealed other anomalies. The woman's shoes, while appearing period-appropriate at first glance, showed a manufacturing quality that didn't match 1917 production techniques. The stitching pattern was too precise. The sole construction suggested modern materials. Her handbag, barely visible in the footage, had hardware that used fastening mechanisms not invented until decades later. Most puzzling was the reaction of the people around her. In an era when even seeing someone use a telephone on the street would have drawn attention, this woman was walking through a Hollywood premiere talking into a handheld device, and nobody seemed to notice. The crowd flowed around her naturally. No one stared. No one pointed. No one showed any sign that anything unusual was occurring. Hollywood historians attempted to identify the woman using studio records, guest lists, and photographs from the event. Despite having detailed documentation of everyone who was supposed to be at the premiere, the woman with the phone couldn't be identified. She didn't match any known attendee. She wasn't part of the studio system. She appeared in the footage and then vanished from history. Technology experts confirmed that no device resembling what the woman was using existed in 1917. Radio technology of that era required large, cumbersome equipment. The first mobile telephone experiments wouldn't occur until the 1940s, and even those early prototypes were the size of suitcases. A handheld wireless communication device was technologically impossible in 1917. The footage raises an impossible question. If this woman was a time traveler from the future, why did she choose to attend this specific event? What was important enough about a Chaplin film premiere to risk temporal contamination? And how did she manage to blend into 1917 while using technology that would have been absolutely extraordinary to anyone who noticed it? Clark's discovery sparked international debate. Skeptics suggested the woman might have been holding a hearing aid or some other period device, but acoustic analysis confirmed she was speaking, not just listening. Her mouth movements were synced with the natural rhythm of two-way conversation. She was talking to someone, and based on her reactions, that someone was responding. The woman with the phone remains unidentified. The device she was using remains unexplained, and the original film negative continues to show exactly what it showed in 1917. A woman from the future, captured on camera decades before the technology she was using would even be conceived. The Nazi Bell. In December 1944, as Allied forces closed in on Nazi Germany from all sides, a secret research project was being conducted in an underground facility near the Wenceslas mine in Poland. The project was codenamed Die Glocke, the Bell, and according to surviving documentation, it involved technology that shouldn't have existed in the 1940s. Witness testimony from former SS officer Jacob Spornberg, provided during his war crimes trial, described a device that defied conventional physics. The bell was a metallic object approximately 9 feet wide and 12 feet high. It consisted of two counter-rotating cylinders filled with a violet-colored mercury-like substance that Nazi scientists called Zerum-525. When activated, the bell generated powerful electromagnetic fields that produced effects Spornberg described as time dilation. Researchers working in proximity to the device aged rapidly. Plants and animals exposed to its field died within hours, their cellular structure breaking down at an accelerated rate. The concrete bunker housing the device showed signs of molecular deterioration that couldn't be explained by conventional radiation exposure. The project was overseen by SS General Hans Kammler, a man responsible for many of Nazi Germany's most advanced weapons programs. Kammler disappeared in May 1945 as Germany collapsed, and despite extensive Allied intelligence efforts, he was never found. His disappearance coincided with the last recorded activation of the Bell device. American intelligence teams that reached the Wenceslas mine in 1945 found an empty underground complex. The Bell device was gone. Equipment had been hastily removed. Documents had been destroyed. But the physical evidence of something extraordinary remained. The concrete floor and walls showed a crystalline structure that radiation experts couldn't explain. The molecular composition had been altered in ways that suggested exposure to forces beyond conventional electromagnetic fields. Polish journalist Igor Witkowski discovered classified documents in the 1990s that provided additional details about the Bell project. According to these reports, the device had successfully demonstrated temporal displacement effects. Test subjects placed near the activated Bell experienced time at different rates than observers outside its field. A person exposed to the Bell for what they perceived as minutes had actually been in the field for hours. The documents described one experiment where a Nazi scientist volunteered to enter the Bell's field while it operated at maximum power. When the field was shut down, the scientist had aged by what appeared to be several years. His hair had grayed. His skin showed accelerated aging. Medical examination revealed cellular degradation consistent with rapid aging, but his memories only accounted for the few minutes he had experienced inside the field. German wartime records reference the Bell project through coded communications that discuss temporal mechanics and field manipulation. These documents use technical terminology that demonstrates understanding of physics concepts that weren't publicly known until decades later. References to torsion fields, quantum vacuum fluctuations, and space-time topology suggest knowledge far beyond what conventional 1940s science had achieved. After the war, several scientists associated with the Bell project disappeared without explanation. Dr. Elizabeth Adler, a physicist who had worked on field calculations for the device, vanished from her home in Austria in 1946. Dr. Kurt Debus, another researcher connected to the project, was recruited by the United States during Operation Paperclip, but refused to discuss his wartime work. When questioned about the Bell, Debus would only say that the research had explored principles that humanity wasn't ready to understand. The most disturbing aspect of the Bell project isn't what it achieved, but where the knowledge came from. Nazi scientists in the 1940s shouldn't have possessed the theoretical framework to even conceive of such a device. The physics required to manipulate time through electromagnetic fields involves concepts that wouldn't be formally developed until the work of researchers like Alcubierre and Thorne in the 1990s. Some researchers have suggested that the Bell project reverse-engineered technology from a source the Nazis encountered during their expeditions to remote regions. Others point to the sudden advancement in Nazi weapons technology in the final years of the war as evidence of knowledge acquired from unexplained sources. The Bell device was never recovered by Allied forces. Kammler was never found. And the scientists who understood how the technology worked either disappeared or took their knowledge to the grave. Whatever temporal mechanics the Nazis had discovered remained classified or lost, hidden in the chaos of Germany's collapse. The Roswell nurses. On July 8, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release announcing the recovery of a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Within hours, the story was retracted and replaced with an explanation involving a weather balloon. The official narrative has remained consistent for over 70 years. But the testimony of several nurses who worked at the base hospital tells a very different story. Miriam Bush worked as a secretary at the Roswell Base Hospital in July 1947. According to her family, Bush came home the evening of July 7th in a state of extreme distress. She told them she had been called to assist with cataloging unusual materials recovered from a crash site. What she saw in that hospital room, she said, would haunt her for the rest of her life. Bush described bodies that were humanoid, but clearly not human. Small frames, oversized heads, and skin that had an unusual texture and coloring. Medical personnel were attempting to perform examinations, But the biology of these beings was unlike anything terrestrial medicine had encountered. More disturbing was what happened when military personnel noticed Bush's presence. She was immediately detained, threatened with imprisonment if she ever discussed what she had seen, and transferred to a different facility within days. Her family reported that she was never the same after that night. She refused to discuss the incident except in the most general terms, saying only that what crashed near Roswell wasn't from this Earth and possibly wasn't from this time. Nurse Adeline Sparks provided even more specific testimony before her death in 1996. Sparks claimed she was present during the medical examination of one being that had survived the crash. This individual was conscious and attempting to communicate. According to Sparks, the being used a small handheld device to project images that military personnel interpreted as star charts showing interstellar navigation routes. But Sparks noticed something that others didn't. The being's device also displayed what appeared to be temporal coordinates, dates and times written in a numerical system that Sparks recognized as similar to human notation. The implication was staggering. These beings hadn't just traveled through space. They had traveled through time. The being communicated through the device that their craft had experienced a temporal displacement malfunction. They hadn't intended to arrive in 1947. Their mission was supposed to bring them to Earth in what Sparks understood to be the late 21st century. The lightning storm that witnesses reported seeing the night of the crash had interfered with their temporal navigation, throwing them backward through time. What made Sparks's testimony particularly compelling was her description of technology the being displayed. She saw devices that matched descriptions of modern smartphones, computers, and medical equipment that wouldn't exist for decades. The being's temporal displacement device showed Earth from space in real time, an impossible capability in 1947 when satellite imagery didn't exist. Military intelligence officers who interviewed the surviving being became convinced they were dealing with human time travelers rather than extraterrestrials. The being's biology, while altered, showed fundamentally human characteristics. Genetic analysis, according to Sparks, revealed DNA that was recognizably human, but modified in ways that suggested advanced genetic engineering. The being explained through their translation device that they represented a future human civilization that had developed both interstellar and temporal travel capabilities. They had been surveying Earth's past as part of historical research when their vessel malfunctioned. The crash near Roswell was an accident that had violated their strict protocols against temporal contamination. Within 48 hours of the crash, all evidence was removed from Roswell. The bodies were transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The craft debris was classified at the highest level of secrecy. Witnesses were threatened with prosecution under national security laws, and the official story became a weather balloon that had crashed in the desert. But the nurses who saw what arrived at that base hospital in July 1947 maintained their testimony. They described technology that was decades ahead of its time. They witnessed biology that was human, but modified beyond the 1940s medical understanding. And they heard explanations about temporal displacement that made sense of an otherwise inexplicable event. Decades later, deathbed confessions from military personnel who were present at Roswell have corroborated the nurses' accounts. These witnesses described the same advanced technology, the same impossible biology, and the same conclusion that shook the military establishment. The beings recovered from Roswell weren't visitors from another planet. They were humans from Earth's future who had come back too early. The Green Children. In August 1887, 2 children appeared in the village of Woolpit, England, under circumstances that local residents described as impossible. The children, a boy and a girl, emerged from old wolf pits near the village. Their skin had a distinct green tint. They spoke a language no one recognized. They wore clothing made from materials that residents couldn't identify, and they refused to eat anything except raw beans. The children were taken in by the local landowner, Richard DeCane, who attempted to communicate with them and understand where they had come from. The boy died within weeks, unable or unwilling to adapt to conventional food. The girl gradually learned to eat regular meals, and as her diet changed, the green tint of her skin slowly faded to normal. As the girl learned English, she provided an explanation for their origin that residents found deeply unsettling. She described coming from a land where the sun never shone and everything was shrouded in perpetual twilight. She and her brother had been tending their father's livestock when they heard strange sounds coming from a cave. Following the sounds, they became lost in underground passages and eventually emerged into the bright sunlight of Woolpit, a place they had never seen before. The girl's description of her homeland included details that suggested advanced technology presented in pre-industrial terms. She described lights that burned without fire, transportation that moved without horses, and structures that reached toward the sky with no visible support. Her explanation of these marvels used vocabulary from her unknown language, combined with English words that didn't quite capture what she was trying to convey. Linguistic analysis of the fragments of language the girl retained revealed something extraordinary. The structure bore similarities to English, but with systematic differences that suggested evolutionary development over time. It was as if she spoke a distant descendant of English, a version of the language that had evolved over many centuries. The material of the children's clothing was analyzed by local merchants and craftspeople. The fabric had unusual properties. It was far more durable than contemporary textiles. It resisted water and staining. When examined closely, the weave pattern showed mechanical precision that hand looms couldn't achieve. The garments had no visible seams, but appeared to be constructed from a single piece of material. Most puzzling was the green pigmentation of the children's skin. Local physicians examined the girl extensively, but found no medical explanation. It wasn't a disease. It wasn't caused by diet or environmental factors. The color appeared to be an intrinsic characteristic of her physiology that gradually normalized as she adapted to Woolpit's environment. The girl eventually integrated into the community, married, and lived a relatively normal life, but she maintained her story about coming from a twilight land throughout her life. She described it as a place where people lived underground, in vast cities lit by artificial suns. She spoke of machines that did all manual labor, and of people who traveled great distances through underground tunnels that connected distant parts of the world. Historical records from the period confirm the basic facts of the case. Parish records document the arrival of the Green Children. Multiple contemporary sources describe the same events with consistent details. The girl's integration into Woolpit society is well documented, including her marriage and later life. Modern analysis of the case has produced various theories. Some researchers suggest the children were survivors of a lost community that had adapted to life in deep cave systems. Others point to the linguistic and technological descriptions as evidence of time displacement. The girl's twilight land could have been a future Earth where humanity had retreated underground due to environmental catastrophe or nuclear war. The most compelling evidence for temporal displacement is the girl's description of her homeland's technology. She described concepts that align remarkably well with modern underground cities: artificial lighting, automated systems, and tunnel boring technology. These weren't metaphors or misunderstandings. They were accurate descriptions of technologies that didn't exist in the 19th century but are commonplace today. The Green Children of Woolpit remain one of history's most persistent mysteries. Two children emerged from nowhere, speaking an unknown language, bearing unusual physical characteristics, and describing a world that sounded like science fiction to Victorian-era listeners, but sounds remarkably like a plausible future to modern analysts. The Philadelphia train. On a rainy evening in November 1950, a passenger train departed from Philadelphia's 30th Street station bound for New York City. The train carried 178 passengers, a crew of 12, and was scheduled to arrive at Pennsylvania Station in Manhattan at 10:47 p.m. It never arrived. More precisely, it arrived exactly on time, but in the wrong year. According to testimony from passengers and crew, the journey proceeded normally for the first hour. Then the train entered a tunnel, and everything changed. The electrical system began to malfunction. Lights flickered. The radio went dead. Passengers described a feeling of intense pressure in their ears, and a strange humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. When the train emerged from the tunnel, it was no longer 1950. The conductor, James Hartley, immediately noticed something wrong when he checked his watch against the station clocks. His watch showed 10:47 p.m., November 15, 1950. The station clock showed 10:47 p.m., November 15, 1975. Passengers began to panic as they realized the world outside the train windows didn't match the one they had left. The cars on the streets looked wrong. The fashions visible through the station's windows were completely different. The advertisements displayed products that didn't exist. And when several passengers attempted to use the station's telephones to call their families, they discovered that many of the phone numbers they knew weren't in service. Station authorities were equally confused. The train wasn't on any 1975 schedule. Its markings identified it as Pennsylvania Railroad rolling stock. But that company had been absorbed into Penn Central in 1968 and reorganized again into Conrail by 1975. The uniforms worn by the crew were decades out of date. And when officials checked the passenger manifest, they found that many of the names matched missing persons reports from 1950. The situation became even more complicated when several passengers recognized people in the crowd in Penn Station. A woman named Margaret Thompson saw what appeared to be her daughter, but her daughter was now visibly middle-aged, not the child Thompson had left at home that morning. A businessman recognized his wife in the crowd, but she was 25 years older than when he had kissed her goodbye hours earlier. Railway officials quickly sealed off the platform and detained all passengers and crew for questioning. Federal authorities were contacted. The case was immediately classified. Within hours, government agents had taken control of the situation, removing everyone from Penn Station and transporting them to an undisclosed location. What happened to those passengers over the following weeks remains largely unknown. Most were eventually released and attempted to reintegrate into a world that had moved forward 25 years without them. Their families had aged. Their jobs no longer existed. The world they knew had vanished, replaced by one that was familiar, yet fundamentally different. Some passengers adapted. They accepted what had happened and built new lives in 1975. Others struggled with the displacement. Several died within months under circumstances that officials described as natural causes, but families questioned. A few passengers simply disappeared again, vanishing from government facilities before officials could complete their investigations. The train itself was dismantled and its components scattered. Railway officials claimed it was decommissioned as obsolete rolling stock. But workers who participated in the dismantling reported unusual characteristics. The metal showed signs of exposure to intense electromagnetic fields. Electronic components had failed in patterns that suggested exposure to forces that conventional engineering couldn't explain. Conductor Hartley spent the rest of his life trying to understand what had happened. He conducted private research into temporal mechanics, electromagnetic anomalies, and reports of similar incidents. Before his death in 1993, he compiled a detailed account of the Philadelphia train incident, including testimony from passengers and crew. His research suggested that the tunnel the train had passed through contained unusual geological features that, combined with specific atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions, had created a temporal vortex. The official explanation remained consistent. The incident never occurred. Records of any train disappearing in 1950 were dismissed as urban legends. Penn Station officials denied that any unusual events took place in November 1975. The passengers who claimed to have traveled through time were dismissed as confused individuals suffering from collective delusion. But the passenger manifest from that November evening tells a different story. It lists 178 names. Missing persons reports from November 1950 match 146 of those names. And death certificates from the mid-1970s show an unusual cluster of people from that manifest dying shortly after being found, decades older than they should have been. The Montauk Boys. Between 1971 and 1983, an alleged research program operated at Camp Hero, a decommissioned military base in Montauk, New York. According to multiple witnesses who claimed to have been involved, the Montauk Project experimented with psychological manipulation, time travel, and interdimensional travel using advanced technology housed in the base's underground facilities. The most disturbing testimony comes from individuals who claimed they were recruited as children to participate in the experiments. These witnesses describe being subjected to intense psychological conditioning, exposure to exotic technologies, and eventual participation in time travel experiments that sent them to various points in the past and future. Duncan Cameron claimed he was one of the primary subjects of the Montauk experiments. According to Cameron, he was selected because of latent psychic abilities that the project's directors believed could be amplified through technological means. He described a device called the Montauk chair, a piece of equipment that could read and amplify human thought patterns, projecting them into physical reality through advanced electromagnetic field manipulation. Cameron stated that he participated in time travel experiments beginning in 1981. He described being sent to various historical periods, including ancient Egypt, medieval Europe, and the American Civil War. The purpose of these missions, according to Cameron, was to verify that time travel was possible and to gather historical information that couldn't be obtained through conventional research. More controversially, Cameron claimed to have been sent into the future, specifically to the year 2749. He described a world where humanity had survived multiple catastrophic events and had developed technologies that seemed magical by 20th century standards. Cities floated in the sky. Energy was abundant and free. Diseases had been eliminated. And time travel was a routine occurrence for research and historical preservation purposes. The problem arose when Cameron and others involved in the project began experiencing serious psychological and physical effects. Time travel, they claimed, created temporal echoes. Subjects would exist simultaneously in multiple time periods, experiencing memories that belonged to different versions of themselves from different timelines. The human mind wasn't designed to process this kind of multidimensional existence. Several subjects who participated in the Montauk experiments died under mysterious circumstances. Others developed severe psychiatric conditions that conventional medicine couldn't explain. They reported seeing people and places that didn't exist in their present timeline. They experienced memories of events that hadn't occurred yet. They aged at irregular rates, with some appearing decades older than their chronological age, while others seemed to have stopped aging entirely. In 1983, according to multiple witnesses, something went catastrophically wrong with one of the experiments. The Montauk chair created a temporal rift that began destabilizing the base. Personnel reported seeing the facility's interior shifting between different time periods. Rooms would appear as they had been in the 1940s, then suddenly shift to show their future state after decades of abandonment. The project was allegedly shut down in August 1983. All equipment was disabled. Underground facilities were sealed. Participants were dismissed with stern warnings never to discuss their involvement. Many were subjected to memory suppression techniques designed to make them forget their experiences at Montauk. But the techniques weren't entirely effective. Beginning in the 1990s, individuals began coming forward with recovered memories of the Montauk experiments. Their testimonies were remarkably consistent. They described the same underground facilities, the same equipment, the same time periods visited, and the same catastrophic final experiment. Physical evidence supporting these claims is limited, but suggestive. Camp Hero's underground tunnel systems are far more extensive than official records acknowledge. Electromagnetic readings in the area show anomalies that geologists can't explain. And local residents report unusual phenomena near the base, including time distortions where hours pass while only minutes seem to have elapsed, or vice versa. Preston Nichols, who claimed to have been technical director of the Montauk project, wrote extensively about the experiments before his death. He provided technical details about the equipment used, including descriptions of technology that was supposedly decades ahead of publicly acknowledged science. His accounts of how the time travel device worked align with theoretical physics concepts that weren't widely known in the 1980s, but have since become subjects of serious academic research. The most compelling aspect of the Montauk testimony is the consistency across multiple witnesses who had no apparent connection to each other. They describe the same facility layout, the same experimental protocols, and the same temporal experiences. They report the same physical and psychological effects. And they all claim that the technology demonstrated at Montauk proved that time travel wasn't just possible, but had been achieved and was being actively used by government programs operating in complete secrecy. The Victor Conspiracy. In 1998, a collection of video recordings allegedly showing an alien interview surfaced and began circulating among UFO researchers. The footage, attributed to a whistleblower using the pseudonym Victor, claimed to show a genuine extraterrestrial being communicating with government interrogators at a classified facility. But careful analysis of the interview suggested something far more disturbing than alien contact. The being in the footage appeared humanoid, but with significant anatomical differences from standard human physiology. Large cranium, diminished facial features, gray skin tone, and eyes that suggested adaptation to different light conditions than Earth normal. The creature was clearly in distress, appearing weak and struggling to communicate. What made researchers pause was the nature of the communication. The being wasn't speaking an alien language. It was attempting to communicate in English, but the words and grammatical structures suggested someone who had learned the language academically rather than growing up with it naturally. Linguistic analysis revealed patterns consistent with how English might evolve over several centuries. More telling was the content of the communication. When interrogators asked where the being came from, it didn't describe a distant star system. It provided coordinates that, when interpreted using standard astronomical notation, didn't point to any location in space. They pointed to a location in time. The year 2371, according to the most common interpretation. The being explained, through labored communication, that it was human. Specifically, it was a modified human, adapted for life in an environment very different from present-day Earth. The physiological changes weren't alien evolution. They were intentional genetic engineering designed to allow humans to survive in whatever conditions existed in the late 24th century. According to the being's explanation, it had been part of a temporal research mission sent back to the 20th century to study a critical period in human development. Something had gone wrong with the temporal displacement technology. The being had materialized inside a military installation rather than at the intended remote location. Military personnel had captured it before it could activate emergency protocols to return to its own time. The being described future Earth in terms that painted a grim picture. Humanity had survived, but at tremendous cost. Environmental catastrophe, nuclear war, or some other global crisis had forced the survivors underground. Genetic engineering had become necessary to adapt to drastically changed living conditions. Time travel had been developed partially to study the past and understand what decisions had led to the future's catastrophic state. Interrogators in the video appeared skeptical until the being provided information that couldn't have been known in 1998. It described technological developments with precise timelines that have since proven accurate. It predicted geopolitical events that seemed impossible at the time, but have occurred. It discussed scientific discoveries that weren't made until years after the alleged interview. Most disturbing was the being's description of the temporal research program's true purpose. According to its testimony, future humans weren't just studying the past. They were attempting to identify intervention points where small changes could prevent the catastrophic future from occurring. The being claimed to be one of many temporal agents operating throughout history, trying to subtly influence human development without causing paradoxes that would destabilize the timeline. Video forensics experts who examined the footage found no evidence of CGI or practical effects trickery. The being's movements, breathing patterns, and physiological responses appeared genuine. The lighting, camera work, and setting were consistent with authentic classified government footage from the 1990s. If the video was a hoax, it required resources and expertise that would have been extremely difficult to assemble. The being died during the interview, apparently unable to survive in Earth's atmosphere, or succumbing to injuries sustained during capture. Its final words, according to the audio, were a warning that the temporal intervention program had failed, and that humanity's future was now locked into the catastrophic path that had produced the being's timeline. Victor, the alleged whistleblower who released the footage, claimed to be a government employee who had participated in the interview and removal of the being's body. He stated that the temporal displacement technology the being had used was recovered and reverse-engineered, contributing to classified programs that have since achieved limited time travel capabilities. The footage has never been definitively authenticated or debunked. Skeptics point to the convenient anonymity of the source and the lack of corroborating evidence. Believers point to the technical accuracy of the being's predictions and the genuine appearance of the footage. The truth remains buried in classified files that may or may not exist. Documenting an encounter that suggests humanity's future has already sent representatives back to observe or intervene in the present.